Is it okay to start? Excellent. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's actually really nice to be at the first session of the day, I think. So very much looking forward to this. And I'm really delighted to welcome you all to this workshop focusing on NDC implementation through sector coupling. And how can we actually finance integrated approaches towards low carbon urban development. And this whole issue of sector coupling is something that we've been seeing coming up lately as really important. And a lot of cities are actually requesting how can we actually move on that. So today, we're actually looking at living in an urbanizing world. I think all of us know that more and more people are moving to cities, and we need to create livable, resilient, and low carbon communities as a fundamental element to achieve our global climate goals. However, the application of climate finance has until now been somewhat limited, often confined to specific siloed interventions rather than having that holistic, integrated urban development approach, which is something that we would like to actually focus on in this session. So recognizing this gap, we're actually coming together today to explore what are those innovative solutions that we can actually tap into to bridge those different sectors, which are so critical for us to achieve the low carbon sustainable development. So our focus will be unlocking the potential of sector coupling. For example, it's about linking energy, mobility, waste, circular economy to the issues around planning and water resources management. So through that multi-stakeholder partnerships, we aim to propel cities towards that low carbon development, making significant strides, we hope, in climate mitigation as we move forward. So two projects that I really wanted to highlight in specific that UN Habitat has been supporting is one is called the Solutions Plus. It's actually trying to provide solutions around some energy and transport and waste issues, so bringing those different sectors together. And then another one, which is the Smart Energy Solutions for Africa. So the Solutions Plus brings together cities, industry, research, implementing organizations, and finance partners to create that platform for shared public and commercial e-mobility solutions. So this project stands at the forefront of the transition towards that low carbon urban mobility. And we're actually working in Hanoi, in Pasig, in Kathmandu, Kigali, Dar es Salaam, Quito, Montevideo, Madrid, Nanjing, and Hamburg. So it's all about bringing those cities together to share experiences in how they actually do that sector coupling, having that sector coupling approach. So the other one is the Smart Energy Solutions for Africa, which is a project that builds on a collaboration between the European Union and 9 African countries. So there's Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Morocco, Namibia, Nigeria, Rwanda, South Africa, and Tanzania. And it's really about replicating energy access technologies and as a sort of a business model that not only addresses energy needs, but also to generate those local opportunities for economic development and building social cohesion. So it's by intertwining these different sectors that we can actually have an impact in creating those low carbon solutions as we move forward. So with that, as we embark on this discussion, we would actually like to discover a little bit more how cities are actually securing sustainable and innovative finance for sector coupling concepts. And one of the things that I also wanted to highlight is that in our UN Habitat Assembly that took place in May, there was a resolution really brought up by the African countries, actually, specifically asking for UN Habitat to support, UN Habitat and partners actually, to support in bringing together planning for sustainable infrastructure. And this is really having that integrated approach, bringing all these different sectors together and being able to provide those tools, develop that knowledge platform, have those exchanges between cities to learn from each other and to be able to take that forward. And this is something that we're really excited about working together with the planners in how we can better actually support cities in doing that going forward. Now, we're very happy today. We have an excellent panel. bringing different aspects. There'll be sort of the waste aspect, the engaging youth and communities aspect. We have a mayor as well. We have somebody who's also going to be talking a little bit more about innovation and finance, and then planners. So I'm really looking forward to this panel. So with that, maybe I'd actually like to invite some of the people to come up. I don't know if you prefer to sit here or would you prefer to sit here? Yeah. Or maybe it's okay. Maybe we can take one at a time. Because also, if you would prefer to actually stand here, that's also a possibility. So I would actually like to start with Mayor Kenalemang Rose Pukunsi, who's the mayor of Swelopelo local municipality from South Africa. Honorable Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can start.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Are we good? Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me acknowledge the opportunity that is given to myself to be part of this important session that speaks about the involvement of subnationals in the NDC and the mobilization of the funding. Because all of us, we are aware that the local government is the most and the critical sphere of government that is closest to the people, that has to make sure that services are rendered in an effective and efficient manner. With the challenges that this sphere of government is facing, because I believe that we are not from the same countries. The situation in South Africa is far different from other countries, and I'm going to elaborate on that. In South Africa, local government is expected to have its own revenue. The sizes of municipalities are not the same. You've got your cities, you've got your secondary cities, you've got your metros, and you've got small municipalities like the municipality that I'm coming from. The situation with the small municipalities is that you are expected to collect from the poorest of the poor that are your communities, of which make life very difficult. On top of that, we only depend on the transfers from the national and provincial government, and of which is not equally sufficient to be able to render services. Now, we are expected equally to take our communities along to deal with issues of climate change, urbanization, and many other issues. And let me start by saying that as the situation is with the developed and developing countries, the local sphere of government is also faced the same challenge. We are expected to build resilience, so much as we did not emit much in terms of emissions, but we have to make life easier and prepare for the future. We cannot say we are not emitting, then therefore we can't do anything, because we need to take care of our own communities. We need to make sure that our communities do understand the challenges that we are facing. But let me go to the topic at hand that speaks about the NDC. It is essential that governments and other non-sectors, state sectors, strongly engage with subnational governments at all levels as governments undertake the next round of NDC. What is critical is the mobilization of multi-level governance processes that enhance collaboration among national and subnational governments and communities is essential for effective and just climate action. In South Africa, we are speaking about just energy transition. There is a framework for that. And that is not the only transition that we are focusing on as sphere of local government. We are also focusing on the just transition, the manner in which we need to do things in ensuring that we render services that will be able to adapt to the shocks of climate change. Climate change is a global problem with local solutions. If we are to reset our current course, the only way we can do that is to have full coordination between local, state, and global leaders. This is what the local governments and municipal authorities constituency has pushed for in its joint COP position. We are also actively advocating for a decisive resolution at COP that mandates the involvement of subnational governments in the revision of NDC in 2024. Cities are often far more ambitious in climate action than their national governments, and all of us, we are aware of that. They involve their citizens, industries, and other institutions to make the change happen at the local level. but they struggle to access mitigation and adaptation finance and the scale needed to address that challenges. As I've already said, that in South Africa, we rely on national and provincial government to be of assistance, of which is not always the case. Let me cite an example that in South Africa, local government has faced about 20 years of the flood funding process. What do I mean by that is that our municipalities are not funded as they are municipalities. But in terms of the constitution, we are expected to render services. It does not exclude to say you are a smaller municipalities. There's section 152 of the constitution give the mandate to all sizes of municipalities. The same mandate does not exclude small municipalities. But municipalities struggle to access mitigation and adaptation finance at the scale needed to address the challenge. They must have direct access to finance, accelerate the transition. Securing increased funding to support the development and implementation of locally driven projects in cities, regions, and towns is very critical. And we know about the loss and fund damage that was launched last year. And we're still asking ourselves, how are we going to access that, the sphere of the government that is closest to the people? It is imperative that funding is tailored to subnational governments, but it can also be easily accessed, directly benefiting the needs of all citizens. This is crucial for building climate resilience and ensuring access to clean and affordable energy for the most vulnerable. Low carbon development is about changing the way we meet the needs of our people without emissions associated with our previous models of development. And I've already touched on that. We need a comprehensive approach and knowledge sharing in order to succeed in low carbon development. But we cannot do that alone. We need everyone to walk the talk with us. Cities face pressing challenges on a daily basis. Rapid urbanization, climate change, and resource scarcity are all converging to demand a fundamental shift in how we plan, develop, and finance our urban areas. Our cities are not only the agents of economic growth, but also epicenters of carbon emissions. We must take bold steps towards reducing our carbon footprint, and this starts with low carbon urban development. Now we are saying sector coupling is a concept that is gaining traction worldwide. It involves integrating and optimizing various sectors such as energy, transportation, and housing to achieve more efficient and sustainable outcomes. By breaking down traditional silos and fostering collaboration, we can unlock synergies that lead to reduced emissions and improved quality of life for our citizens. One of the key challenges we face is financing these ambitious projects. Building low carbon, sustainable cities requires substantial investments. If we've got a small municipality, it's very difficult to attract investors. However, we must view this as an opportunity rather than a burden. Investment and sustainable urban development can yield long-term economic benefits, create jobs, and enhance the overall well-being of our communities. We must also strengthen efforts to propel Africa's just transition. It is critical that we empower and prioritize historically marginalized and vulnerable groups within urban Africa, ensuring they have a voice, recognition, and agency. By fostering inclusivity and adopting a people-centered and a human rights-based approach, cities can better address sustainability challenges and improve the overall quality of life for all residents. Low carbon development is one of the key to unlocking this a decade of action. So what we are saying is that we need everybody. We need both subnational, national, and regional governance for us to be able to take care of the future officers, the young people that are in our municipalities. But we cannot do it alone if we leave our communities alone. What we are actually advocating for, we're advocating for access to funding, because if we are not going to access funding, our ambitions will be just a failure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Honourable Mayor. And I think you really touched upon some really important issues there. The collaboration between national, subnational, regional government to be able to ensure that we can actually make a difference. And how important it is also to raise awareness with communities around that, taking on board the just transition. I also loved what you were saying as well. You know, climate change is a global issue, but it's really where the local level where we will find the solutions of how to deal with it. And how can we actually support municipalities, especially smaller municipalities, to have access to funding? You also actually talked about how important this is for young people. And with that, I'd actually like to invite Christina Jäger, who is the co-founder and managing director of the Yunus Environment Hub. And they actually support in developing and implementing social business solutions, providing expertise on all aspects related to environmental issues. And I think there's also a very strong focus on how to engage young people in this process. So Christina, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me here to speak. I was asked to share some examples of our work on how we are financing low carbon cities. So I would like to start by saying that implementing sector coupling for NDCs in the content of low carbon urban development requires a comprehensive and integrative approach. Sector coupling, as we heard, involves connecting traditionally separate sectors, such as transportation, energy, waste, circular economy, to optimize resource use and to reduce carbon emissions. We've also just heard that cities are the hotspots for emissions, for pollutions, for waste, because this is where people live, where people are aggregated. And hence we also see cities as the solution providers. And financing such integrated approaches involves a combination of both public and private funding, as well as innovative financing mechanisms. At Yunus Environment Hub, we invest in capacity building programs and knowledge transfer initiatives to empower local communities and businesses to implement low carbon solutions. And knowing that in many countries of the global south, the majority of the population are young people, empowering local communities also means empowering young people. And through these capacity building programs and the knowledge transfer activities, these activities can attract the support from international organization donors as well as private investors. Capacity building and knowledge transfer play a crucial role in implementing sector coupling for NDCs. And I want to share the following examples of initiative that can facilitate this capacity building and knowledge transfer that we have so far implemented in our work. Number one is workshops and seminars. We organize workshops and seminars that bring together experts, policymakers, and practitioners to share experiences, best practices, and lessons learned in implementing sector coupling. These events can foster collaboration and knowledge exchange. And the focus that we put on these programs is that it's not just looking at the traditional sectors, but really taking into account the local societal needs, bringing in social elements and the questions of addressing inequity, which we often see as an underlying challenge related to these other sectors. The second example are technical assistance programs. We provide technical assistance to municipalities and local governments to enhance their capacity to plan and implement integrated projects. This may include assistance with project feasibility studies, data analysis, and the development of strategic plans. For example, in Cambodia, we are currently working with several municipalities in developing waste management plans that integrate the financing and the organization of waste collection, the reduction of waste and pollutants, in the context of a just transition. Number 3, we implement demonstration projects that showcase successful sector coupling practices. These projects can serve as tangible examples for decision makers, stakeholders, and the public, illustrating the benefits of integrated approaches. An example is one of our e-mobility projects in Kenya that tackles transportation, energy, green job creation, and smart technology. This startup uses solar energy to charge e-bike batteries and to run 3D printing machines to produce cases from plastic waste that are installed on regular bikes to fix the e-battery and turn those regular bikes into e-bikes for carbon-free delivery services that can be used by entrepreneurs in the communities. Number 4, we empower local communities with the knowledge and skills needed to actively participate in low-carbon urban development. This could include awareness campaigns, workshops, and training sessions tailored to the specific needs of community members. At this moment, UNOS Environment Hub implements, together with Make IT Africa and GIZ, the Smart City Innovation Program that empowers African innovation support organizations to apply smart cities programs in their communities. Through training and the provision of handbooks and guidelines, these innovation support organizations are empowered to act as multipliers in their communities, to build capacities of startups and local communities to create low-carbon cities using data and technologies. Number 5, collaborative research initiatives. We encourage collaborative research initiatives between academic institutions, industry partners, and government agencies. Research projects can focus on addressing specific challenges related to sector coupling and can provide evidence-based insights. We have a global network of 110 universities that host UNOS Social Business Centers, working on initiatives to address zero net carbon emissions with the stakeholders in the cities and countries that they are based. And then number 6, policy dialogues and forums. We organize policy dialogues and forums to facilitate discussions among key stakeholders, including government officials, industry leaders, and environmental advocates. These platforms can address policy barriers and promote a conducive regulatory environment for sector coupling. For example, we ran the Social Innovation for Sustainability initiative for the German Environment Ministry in developing policy recommendations that are being derived from these policy dialogues and forums that we are organizing with the different stakeholders. So by combining these capacity building and knowledge transfer initiatives, governments and organizations can create a supportive environment for the successful implementation of sector coupling strategies aligned with NDCs. These efforts can contribute to building expertise, fostering collaboration, and driving innovation in the pursuit of low-carbon urban development. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christina. I think it's really sort of important. How do you're actually linking a lot with universities, with local communities, and actually bringing them together to actually find solutions on the local level. And I think that's so important in being able to showcase how communities can actually come together and also come up with solutions. I think one of the things which I also that stood out for me is, you know, you were talking about capacity building and knowledge transfer, but not only that, it's actually influencing decision-making, which I think you were also saying, you know, how gathering a lot of the data and the knowledge that can then influence the decision-making and have an impact for the future. So no, thank you for that. I think with that, we have an all-women panel actually today, which I'm really excited about as well, because we've been talking about some of the, we've got the local government perspective, we got the perspective of one of the areas of intervention around waste, energy, and entrepreneurship. And now I'd actually like to invite Olga Chepelianskaya, who's the founder of Unicity, which is an international think tank working with cities across Asia and the Middle East, specifically on integrated urban planning and design, climate change adaptations and mitigation strategies, as well as urban culture and heritage regeneration. But I think that's what sort of brings all of this together, is actually the planning aspect. So I'd like to give you the floor, Olga. You're welcome.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Cecilia, for the introduction and for this kind invitation as well. I'm here as an observer on behalf of ISOCARP, the International Society of City and Regional Planners. We are nearly 1,000 planners across the world working with countries, with municipalities. So I'll share a few observations based on my participation in this institution, as well as acting on behalf of Unicity. So working very intensely across Asian cities, I see that, and I'm sure you observed this as well, the administration is very much structured by sectors. And it is something we observe both at the national level, at the municipal level, but also at the level of international institutions. If you work with a UN agency or a development bank, you would usually have a department responsible for transportation, another one responsible for water, then we have energy, solid waste, and so on. And while these focus on the sector and now more and more see how we can reduce emissions in the sector, we don't really see any effort in thinking how we can reduce emissions at scale by creating strong synergies between these sectors. So now we could think that urban planning could come and solve the issue, because in fact, urban planning would look at spatially positioning assets from these different sectors at the city level, and then you see the combination. Even if you work in GIS, you would see these layers of maps. But what we actually need and what is not happening is closely linking the sectors in light of resource efficiency and climate change. To give you an example, so I lived in India for many years, and I came to learn that most medium to big size Indian cities actually bring water from as far as 300 plus kilometers away. So imagine the energy consumption that you need to actually bring this water in there. At the same time, most of these cities also are part of, especially in the south of India, of tropical climate where you have the monsoon season. And so there, the same cities would get flooded. And at that time, there is not enough active focus on how do we store this water so that we can use it. So at least some part of the water we bring from so far away, we can avoid by using the water that we have in house. So these kind of linkages we need to make. And to give you an example at a bigger scale, at a neighborhood scale. So when we plan a neighborhood and construction starts, very often in the hot climates of Asia and the Middle East, I see wide streets with buildings relatively far away from each other. So then what happens there is that we don't have the shadowing, which allows us to comfortably circulate within the neighborhood. And such an important matter as the sun direction and the wind patterns are not considered. So then as a result, outside, I am exposed to the sun most of the time. I don't have the breeze from the wind. I'm already uncomfortable. Now, when I'm going inside my building, there as well, certain materials are much more urban heat island generating than others. And these are typically the ones we mostly use. Concrete, we don't very often think of alternatives. So then that would contribute to the heat island effect. Now I go inside, I have to rely on air conditioning if I can afford it. What does this air conditioning do? It will blow hot air outside, which makes it even worse for me to now stay outdoors. Now, because buildings are sparse, and unless I have a very efficient public transportation, which doesn't often happen, in most Asian cities. Now I have to rely on my car to move. It's hot. I don't have public transportation. I can't walk. So the cars are coming. What do we get as a result? So quality of life is not great and emissions are very high because we consume more electricity at home for cooling. We use our cars, so the fuel is consumed. So that is the situation. Now, if you flip it and you say, okay, I'll start from the design side. And my design will focus on what is the DNA of the place. What should I consider so that I optimize my construction in line with local conditions? So then if I have this hot climate, I'll surely think about how to position the buildings in such a way that my natural shadowing will make it comfortable for me. I look at the wind patterns. I'll think of passive design at a building level so that I need to rely on electricity-based cooling as less as possible. And so when this happens and I have a more compact built up, there is a fair chance that also I can walk more. And so it becomes easier to put public transportation in place, which allows you not to depend on your car so much. If you add a little bit of greenery into it, then you actually get great environment. So when we take this integrated approach between the sectors, what we end up with is not only lowering emissions, but also making the quality of life much higher. And because you have now this environment where you can share the outdoors together, you also generate sense of belonging. Now you want to spend time there, you want to talk to your neighbors. And this is where you also get the sense of identity. And so here I would like to pause for a bit on what identity plays as a role when we talk about decarbonizing cities. If you look at the example of Singapore, so Singapore is a country city, and of course, institutions allow things to happen in a way which in many cities would be much more challenging to achieve. But if you just look at the technical level, what was achieved, we see one of the highest population densities in the world. It's, I think, 8,500 people per square kilometer. And yet the city aims at having 50% of its spaces, green and blue spaces. So here, what do we learn? It's actually not contradictory to have high density and to also have green and blue ecosystems. Now, we specialize on climate change, working with cities at Unicity. So we looked closely into how climate has evolved in Singapore over the last 40 years. It's been affected by the same challenges as any other countries and cities in the region, with higher temperatures, higher and more unpredictable rainfall patterns. But yet over the same period, the thermal comfort has increased. So when you are outdoors in Singapore, you are much more comfortable than in Bangkok, which is a very similar climate. Bangkok is a little less humid. And floods have nearly disappeared. Whereas 30 years ago, Singapore was quite prone to flooding. So we can see that with this integrated approach to planning, we can achieve a lot. And so what does Singapore do? This is something that not many people know. It places the concept of identity at the core of all its planning, starting with high-level planning, which is long-term planning, then trickling down to master plans, trickling down to detailed plans. And even each neighborhood has its own identity, which has been identified, and around it, guidelines have been developed. So actually, if we flip this approach, so in the previous part of my talk, I said that if we now develop design in line with the local context, we reach identity. But if we flip this upside down and we say, first, I want to focus on what is the identity of my place? What is the DNA of my place? What are its core strengths? What are its key weaknesses? And how can I address the weaknesses coming from the unique strengths that this place has? Then what do you get as a result? Not only you're able to build a much lower carbon development and much more adapted to climate change, but you also gain so many co-benefits from the quality of life, from the visual identity, because now if you think, identity is basically, like DNA. So many components come together and together they create something unique. So now I took care of what is my climate, what is my topography. I looked at how people used to live, what can heritage inspire me in this place? What are stories that people tell me, what kind of different ethnicities, cultures, religions live in this place, what are their needs. So when you combine all of this together, you have that unique urban realm that not only is sustainable, but also opens up a whole new level of opportunities at the tourism level, at the level of where qualified people actually want to come and live in your city. And then it attracts new economic opportunities, which, for example, is very important for the Gulf region, which creates more equity where people actually start spending more time with each other because there are these public places which they can share independently from which origin they're coming from. So I guess I will end with this idea that if we try to see it upside down and really start planning with what is the unique value that the place has, I think we can really go to a whole different level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Olga. And I really appreciate you talked about how the importance of the different sectors actually coming together to be more resource efficient. And I think that's where planning can sort of bring all those different sectors together. And then I think really important sort of that compact city, the more connected city, the socially mixed city. And I loved what you were saying about the DNA and how that actually then influences social inclusion, really important. We have maybe just very short time if there are any questions to our lovely panelists. I think we've had some really nice interventions, both from government, from planning perspective, but also from more entrepreneurial perspective. Any questions? Yes?
International Transport. Hi, I work with the International Transport Workers Federation, and I was really interested in the points around connectivity, making sure there's access to financing. So and making sure it's relevant. So one question for you is, we know that sometimes it's very difficult to identify what the needs are unless that's built into the financing. So we've been exploring doing things like labor impact assessments at the outset and tying that to financing so that you really identify what the issues are and they're built in from the beginning. Is that something that you think we could be doing across the board so we get financing where it needs to go?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, that's something that we have to do because as we plan in an integrated manner. We don't plan in silos. If the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing, then we are going to fail. If you are failing to plan, then we are planning to fail. So that's something that we can do as to integrate, because as local government, we are the sphere of government that rendered services. And we are aware the economic growth happens. So if we can't do that, then there is nothing better that we can do. Thank you.
Yes. Olga, I think you have a question as well.
If I may add something on finance. So yesterday we had the honor of having Her Excellency Executive Secretary of UN Habitat at an event we had at ISOCARP together with our TPI. And she mentioned something very important. She said, when you do the planning, think about what funding is available so that the plan doesn't stay on its own and finance doesn't stay on its own. And I'd like to flip it around and say that actually the big issue of integrating this integrated approach we are talking about is that there is no funding for it. There is funding for transportation projects, there is funding for water projects and so on. But now you come and say, okay, I want to think about these linkages. Where is the funding? So I have two suggestions that maybe our colleagues from UN Habitat could take forward if they like it. I think at the national and municipal level, if we manage to just dedicate a certain share of the budget, say this is for integrated planning. So whatever it is, 5% of the budget, but it has to be tapped into for that. So at least we secure it. And importantly, the same has to happen at the level of international institutions. Because again, if I'm an Asian country and I go to the Asian Development Bank, they don't have funding for this kind of an activity. So if there was a dedicated share of funding just for that, I think it would completely uplift the whole story.
No, thank you for that, Olga. Maybe that's exactly here, like you're saying, maybe that's something that we could take up in advocating for a budget that is more for that, in bringing together that integrated approach. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
The last
Please go
part
ahead.
is that integration speaks to the budget. You can't plan without having a budget. Maybe as what we are doing is different. In South Africa, we've got a 5-year cycle of integrated projects that are planned. It speaks to all the services that are rendered at local sphere of government. You can't have national government speaking to something else that is not in an integrated development plan. So your integrated development, it's like your SDGs. You are planning to have these particular things, but what is critical amongst all these things is to do things differently. We must change the manner in which we used to do things, because if you are going to plan to have a bridge and build a bridge in the same way that you used to build, whilst we are faced with the climate disasters, then we are planning to fail. So finance is critical, but it needs to speak to what you intend to do, taking your communities along. Thank you so much.
And I think in South Africa, you have your integrated development plans that you're all implementing. So really important. You already do that integration. Yes, final question.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Paul Curry. I'm the director of the Urban Systems Unit at ICLEI Africa. And what we're discussing is what's plaguing me a lot. We might have arrived at integrated planning in many spaces. And systems thinking tells us, well, we must look at the whole system so we can find the high leverage intervention points so we can invest in that. But that doesn't work, because if you invest in one part of the system, but you don't have finances for the other elements of the system, you open up to systems failure, and then people write off renewables or integrated mobility or whatever you're trying to push for. So I think that your suggestions were quite interesting in terms of getting funding for the integration work, but I think it also has to go beyond the integrated planning. It has to be integrated implementation, and maybe some of our future advocacy to national government needs to be certain conditionalities about how projects are implemented to honor the integrated planning, because the integrated planning happens and then each siloed department has to find resources to do their piece. And if one or two of the different departments fail to get their funding because resources are scarce, the whole system fails, and everyone is like, well, for example, in South Africa, we've done transport-oriented development, and the one piece that's missing is capturing the property value. And so the whole system actually isn't delivering on its promise. So that's a provocation I have. I don't know if there are any thoughts on how we do that integrated implementation.
Yeah. I think you're actually hitting the nail on the head. And I think that's something that we will take with us as we go forward, because we're actually coming to the end of our session. And I do want to actually invite Alina Koshmaida, who's actually with our planning, finance and economy section with you in Habitat, who is actually going to discuss a little bit about that integrated approach and delivering low carbon development through climate finance. So Alina, I give you the last word, and then I think we will finish after that. Please, Alina.
Thank you. Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you. Yes, for the PowerPoint. So I'm very, very glad that I get to close this session, which was quite inspiring, and was nice to look at these topics of NDC implementation, sector coupling, urban planning, and finance together, which I think it's important to discuss them as like a coherent approach to sustainable urban development. So my intervention, I would like to propose a small closure to this discussion. Maybe we can continue discussing also afterwards if we have time, but to also build on all the different challenges and solutions that have been proposed also by our different panelists. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So I think one of the main, the reason why we're here is that the Paris Agreement and the NDCs are really at the heart of international climate action today. And COP28 has shown again that cities and urban areas are key to achieving low carbon development, emission reduction, and the NDCs. And however, so that we can actually make use of the potential that we have in cities, it is important to integrate urban aspects into NDCs, national adaptation plans, and also national development plans and strategies. But I think there's still a way to go, because today So 50% only of urban development policies actually have a climate resilience aspect. And so I think there's a strong need to scale up the effort and to reach the needed emission reduction. Next slide, please. But I think we can also say that there has been some progress, especially when we look on the urban content in NDCs. So the recent study from UN Habitat that was done in 2021 shows that actually 84 of NDCs have a strong or moderate urban content. And there has been actually quite an increase from the last time that this was analyzed in 2016. Back then, only 16% of NDCs had a strong urban content. And in 2021, there were 45% that had this strong urban content. So we see that there is quite an effort made to also integrate urban content into NDCs. And I think that's critical to also support urban areas and cities in delivering on their ambitions for climate mitigation. Next slide, please. And so to further advance the climate agenda and scale up our efforts, one element that has been highlighted in this panel and also during COP28 is the need for multi-level climate action and to have a vertically integrated approach for mitigation. And so I think it's important, has also been highlighted by our panelists, is that cities can be the place to also implement innovation and to test specific approaches, specific technologies. And here it's important that cities receive also the support from national governments through finance, through capacity to implement and test new approaches. And that then also this experience is used by national governments to build on it and to scale it up at the national level. Next slide, please. And in addition, there is also this collaborative effort that we have been talking about that must also extend to national stakeholders from different sectors. So like ministries from housing, from transport, also national utilities like energy, and also stakeholders from the private sector, like housing, construction companies, for example. And we need to develop this integrated approach that brings together different levels of government and different sectors to achieve the objective that we have in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation. Next slide, thank you. So here I just wanted to highlight the initiative Search that was actually developed and proposed during last COP27. It's an initiative that was launched at COP27 at the ministerial meeting for urbanization and climate change. And it was developed under the leadership of the COP27 presidency with support from UN Habitat and also facilitated by ICLE. And the Search initiative, it actually focused on bringing together global, national, local levels for climate action. And it also has 5 working groups that work on different sectors that we have been talking about. So these sectors include, for example, housing and building, urban energy, urban waste, urban mobility, and urban water. So the idea is really to have this multi-level and cross-sectoral approach to climate action. Next slide, thank you. And so the importance of cross-sectoral planning, I think it's also highlighted in this slide, because when we consider that 75% of infrastructure is yet to be built, this also highlights that there's actually an opportunity for us to deliver on climate mitigation if we start planning differently our infrastructure, our sectors today. And it has also been shown that urban systems actually are key and hold key solutions to reduce 90% of emissions by 2050 through feasible and already existing technologies. And so this, the graph, it highlights, for example, the different technologies that already exist in different sectors that can be used to reduce emissions. And so we see, for example, a great potential also in the building sector for mitigation. Next slide, please. And at the same time, as we have been also highlighting, is that we need to look at the sectors, but we also need at the urban planning approach. So we really need to move towards more compact, more integrated, more connected cities so that we can have a city where residents have a closer access to different services, to employment, to reduce travel time, to make street networks more accessible, and to bring people closer to services that are also closer to their homes. Next slide, please. And so to achieve this effective emission reduction in cities, we need to adopt an integrated planning approach so that it considers application at the different scales, but also across the different urban subsectors at all the stages of the planning process. And also what we have been discussing, what has been mentioned quite several times, is the need to mainstream the finance aspect into all levels of planning, and also to adopt this participatory approach in the different levels of planning, bringing together different stakeholders to discuss and to imagine also the cities of the future. And so here I wanted to highlight the toolbox, Our City Plans, that was developed by UN Habitat. And it's a toolbox that's supposed to help cities implement participatory integrated urban planning processes. It's a toolbox that was actually designed specifically for intermediate-sized and smaller-sized cities. And it is a very straightforward approach, but also an approach that is adaptable to the local context. And it has an approach in 4 phases, so from the assessment to the implementation phase. Thank you. And so the Our City Plan, it has 4 phases, 12 blocks, and actually currently 58 activities. And each activity has a step-by-step process that urban planners, urban experts can follow. And in addition to this step-by-step process, we also have specific tools, Excel tables, but also additional references that can be used by cities to be guided in the urban planning process. Next slide, please. And so we also have a customized planning approach in this toolbox, which actually helps city officials and experts to adapt also the planning process to their local priorities. And currently we have, for example, as a cross-cutting topic, climate change, but also finance. So it's possible to customize the planning process. There is an online tool actually on the website. And as a beginning, when you start the planning process, there's a questionnaire where experts can select the priorities for their cities. And based on these priorities, also the planning process will be adjusted and adapted, and will include specific activities, for example, to strengthen the climate aspect of the planning process. Thank you. And so to move from planning to implementation, we really need to focus on the finance aspect, and it's something that has been highlighted a lot in this panel. And I think it's key now when we think about how to really implement different plans that exist already, because in fact, many cities struggle to move from planning to implementation. And so I think there's a need to integrate the finance into the planning process, to bring together different stakeholders that work on finance from the planning start, so including banks, investors, development agencies, but also to consider different types of funding sources, a diversity of funding sources, including from international funds, public budgets, private sector, and to also explore financing mechanisms from vertical climate funds like the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, etc. And at the same time, it's important to continue advocating to strengthen the urban content and the climate change content in policies at the national and local level, because that's actually what will create the enabling framework for the financing to happen and for investors to come in and to invest in cities. And here, I think also linked to the investment side, there is a need to have really evidence-based planning frameworks that are based on data. And so there's a need also to strengthen data collection processes in cities, but also to strengthen monitoring frameworks. And so some examples here on the slide are tools developed by UN Habitat that are supposed to strengthen to help cities implement data collecting processes, but also data monitoring and indicator monitoring processes to follow their urban planning process. And so we need to strengthen local climate action. And for this to happen, we need to localize climate finance to cities. That has been also pronounced several times today. So we need to channel funding to the local level to municipalities, to communities, because that is where the challenges are closest to the decision makers. That is where decision makers know what are the challenges and what solutions can be applied at the local level. And at the same time, we need to foster also approaches that are cross-cutting, integrated approaches that combine planning approaches and sector approaches. So for example, if we want to reduce the number of cars in our cities, we need to have approaches that are more planning based, so for compact cities and connected cities. And at the same time, we need to also strengthen the public transport system to have an alternative, to offer also to the local population. And I just wanted to end with this call for action that it has actually been developed for this COP this year. It was a call for action that has been endorsed on December 6th by UN Habitat and several partners, including C40, UCLG, urban partners, and other partners. And the call for action actually focuses on urban planning and the need to strengthen urban planning and integrated urban planning. And through this call for action, the different partners, they have committed to implementing different types of initiatives on their side to strengthen urban planning processes for climate adaptation and mitigation. So for example, we have the Global Observatory of Sustainable Proximities from UN Habitat, C40, Sorbonne, and UCLG. But also we have the Our City plans that I presented earlier, where there is a will to integrate more strongly the climate aspect, mainstream it into the planning process, and also to have this sustainable infrastructure component more strongly in the toolbox. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alina. And I think with that, we will wrap up for today and say a really warm thank you to all our speakers. I was actually so happy that we've had an all-women panel today. That was very exciting. Thank you for joining us. And I think the next session may start shortly. Great. Thank you.